I wanted to do a quick breakdown because I think a lot of people are confused about this conflict. I see a lot of misinformation on this app, especially from content creators who have large followings. And I just wanted to kind of educate people on how this really started, what the specifics are, and how the US relates to this. Now, before I get started, I do want to make it clear that the purpose of this video is not to offend anyone, but just more so to educate, because I've seen a lot of misinformation that is being spread on this app by content creators who have very large followings, which I feel is extremely dangerous if you're going to talk about a topic that you don't really seem to be knowledgeable about. And from the language that I've seen in several of the videos from these content creators who claim to be progressives on the left, they seem to be very emotional when speaking about this topic, which is completely understandable, but we also have to put aside our emotions and speak facts. And there are a lot of facts that are being distorted, specifically about the Biden administration and the role that they have been playing in this. And we also need to get an understanding of what genocide really is versus apartheid. In order to understand the conflict, we need to know some history about Jerusalem, which is, if you look at it, part of the issue, and I'll explain later in this video. Now, this city in particular has had a total of 16 battles for control throughout its history. It's been destroyed a total of 2 times. It's been besieged, attacked, captured, recaptured, I don't know how many times. And the first settlement that I could find was around 4500 to 3500 BCE, and that's based on archaeological evidence. Now, this is where the confusion started for me, because a lot of this is based on religious scholars, and I don't have any expertise on this, so I didn't really go deep in depth. But the ownership of Jerusalem seems to be an issue between religions, where you have the Egyptians who base their ownership of Jerusalem on these Egyptian texts. However, according to the Hebrew Bible in the book of Genesis in 1850 BCE, the binding of Isaac, which is where God orders Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac, was on a mountain in the land of Moriah, which many biblical scholars have interpreted that to be Jerusalem. Now, both of these have been widely disputed amongst each other. Now, some historical biblical scholars believe it all began with the kingdom of Israel and Judah, which was under the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon. This is all according to the Hebrew Bible. Now, I'm not a biblical expert, so I can't go into full detail. I'm just stating some interesting facts that I learned while trying to understand this conflict, if that makes sense. Now, according to this timeline, it began in 723 BCE when the Jews were ran out of the kingdom of Israel by the newly Syrian Empire, and then by the kingdom of Judah in 597 BCE. Now, the Judean population did rebel against the Roman Empire in 55 CE, which of course they lost, and that led to Jerusalem being destroyed in 70 CE. However, in 132 CE, a Jewish military leader by the name of Simon Bar Kokhba had led a revolution against the Romans. However, they were defeated, and that caused the Jews to lose access to Jerusalem. Now, after the revolt, the Romans decided to name the Palestine region Syria Palestinia. Then in 1516, the Ottoman Turks occupied Palestine, and at the time, the land was primarily Palestinian and Muslim, with a solid Christian population until about the late 19th century, when the Zionist movement was born. And this movement was actually born to initiate mass immigration of Jews to Palestine, and some possibly Argentina. Now, since Jews have been living in Palestine since before Christ and have already been migrating to Palestine before the Zionist movement, I'm assuming that's why they primarily focus on Palestine. Now, prior to the Zionist movement and mass migration to Palestine, the Russian Empire actually had the largest Jewish population. However, that changed after there was a failed attempt at a revolt in 1905, which actually caused the majority of their Jewish population to start migrating to Palestine. And as I stated earlier, there has always been a population of Jewish people in Palestine prior to the Zionist movement, and there were people migrating there. However, it was mostly elderly. While under the Ottoman rule, the Jewish population had to designate Hebrew as their official language. And of course, in 1918, here's where the British come in, because they actually defeated the Ottoman Empire after World War I, and that actually led to a mandate for Palestine. Now, in order to secure a mandate for Palestine, this required Britain to enforce the Balfour Declaration. Now, this declaration was basically a letter that was written from the British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Walter Rothschild, who was a prominent leader in the Jewish community in the United Kingdom. This letter, he actually promised an establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. In the declaration, he also made it clear that His Majesty's government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. So he also let it be known that the British government, meaning His Majesty, aka the great-grandfather of the current King of the United Kingdom, King George V, his government is going to facilitate this. Then we find out they're playing both sides, because there's a total of 10 letters, which was between 1915 and 1916 between Sharif Hussein, who was the Emir of Mecca, and the British High Commissioner Sir Henry McMahon. In these letters, Sir Henry McMahon had promised an independent Arab state to the Greater Syria, if in return Hussein would launch an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire, which this revolt was actually led by one of Hussein's sons. And of course, I don't know if you're familiar with Lawrence of Arabia, who was an agent for the British. So basically, they were playing both sides. Many people believe that this was a strategy by the Brits, who actually believed the Jewish would be influential in countries like the US and Russia, and that would also help them defeat Germany in the war. After the British had took responsibility for Palestine and began enforcing the Balfour Declaration, they actually started initiating mass immigration of Jews from Europe to Palestine. Now, the Paris Peace Conference of 1919 was supposed to be the British way of mending fences and fixing the problem that they created by playing both sides. However, after this conference was over, they decided to take over complete control of Palestine via the League of Nations. And then, of course, that didn't sit well with both the Jewish and the Arab population, who actually began to revolt against the British government. And of course, following World War II, being broke AF, they didn't have the means to fight back, so they had to actually take this to the newly created United Nations. Now, once the United Nations stepped in, this is what they proposed, which is a partition of mandatory Palestine at the end of the Balfour Mandate. Now, the resolution recommended creating an independent Arab and Jewish state, which would require British armed forces to withdraw, and that would create boundaries between two states and keep Jerusalem independent. Part of the plan stipulated that the mandate would be terminated as soon as possible, and the United Kingdom would have to withdraw no later than August the 1st of 1948. And the new states would take effect 2 months after the official withdrawal from the British troops. Now, initially, Palestinians did reject this partition because they considered the plan to be pro-Zionist. On top of that, they were giving 62% of the land to the Jewish, despite them only making up a third of the population. So to them, this was considered catastrophic, and this actually was the start of the endless wars that we are currently seeing today. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to end this here and continue on to part 2 with the 1947-1948 war that broke out between Israeli and the surrounding Arab nations. Like for part 2.